William James and Functionalism, Part 3, The Self. History of Psychology, Professor Mike Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. Another area that James was interested in was the concept of the self. How do people conceptualize themselves? What do people think about themselves? He developed a model that he called the empirical self, split into 3 pieces that we're going to explore in this video. I really strongly suggest that you follow the link and watch the George Carlin video on stuff, as it fits in extremely well with James's material self. We end our discussion by talking about an idea that's become very bastardized, and that's James's idea of self-esteem. It had nothing to do with warm fuzzies. So, here is James's self. William James labeled the empirical self as everything a person calls their own. He subdivided it into 3 areas. First of all, the material self. And that's everything a person owns, including their body. Some people measure themselves by their possessions, and they will look at themselves in terms of the car they drive, the home they live in, the clothes they wear, or how perfect or imperfect their bodies are. For an interesting view on the self, I'd like you to, when you're done with this section of the video, go to YouTube and look at the video here where George Carlin, the eminent comedian philosopher, discusses stuff. You'll find it funny and insightful. The second type of self that William James talks about is the social self. And this is the self known by other individuals. To me, this looks very much like the Jungian notion of persona. And this will vary by the individuals. In personality psychology, we often talk about getting data about the social self in terms of observer reports, and we know observers vary in their knowledge of individuals across different settings. My students know me as a professor. My parents know me as their son. My children know me as dad. And my wife knows me as her husband. You can imagine there are many other types of selves we have, and some of those will be consistent views across people, others won't. The final kind of self in James's system is the spiritual self. This is an individual's subjective experience of reality, their conscientiousness, too much of a personality psychologist, I guess, and their emotions. A lot of times we try to figure out what we're going to do in a certain situation, and we fall back to how we've behaved before and how well do we, as Socrates says, know thyself. Why do people feel good or bad about themselves? To William James, it's a matter of what he defined as self-esteem. James said, with no attempt, there can be no failure. With no failure, no humiliation. So, our self-feelings in this world depend entirely on what we back ourselves to be or do. So, what James says is that if you do not succeed at task, you should feel upset, you should have low self-esteem. And furthermore, you should use those feelings of upset or dissatisfaction with your performance as a motivating factor to do better in the future. So let's look at the mathematical definition of self-esteem. It's rather simple. According to William James, self-esteem is a relatively simple ratio of successes to what he deemed pretensions. In other words, how many things you're successful at versus how many things you think you can do, or how many tasks you take on. If you do many things and you're not successful, you'll have low self-esteem. If you do a few things and you do them well, you'll have high self-esteem. There are many ways to, as one of my colleagues likes to say, game the system with self-esteem. So you can increase self-esteem, from a William James point of view, in two ways. First, succeeding more frequently. This is an easy thing to do. Just be more successful. I'm being facetious here, but that's what James says. Be more successful and you will have higher self-esteem. The ratio will go up. Or, secondly, attempt to perform fewer tasks. Lower your number of pretensions. So if you do very few things, but you do them very well, you'll have high self-esteem. In our modern society, it seems like people take on innumerable tasks that they can never succeed at because they're just very over time committed. And James would say, cut back a little bit, don't do as much, but do it well. Here is my poster child for self-esteem, Iru. And there's a documentary that regularly runs on the streaming services titled Iru Dreams of Sushi. Iru is the preeminent sushi master in Japan. He runs a small restaurant that is at a subway station in Tokyo, and it takes months and months to get in. All Iru does is make sushi. All Iru does is think about sushi. In fact, he's so prone to be thinking about sushi that he even dreams of sushi, hence the name of the documentary about his work. He produces the finest sushi in Japan. That's all he does. He makes the relatively simple sushi pieces. I don't think you'll see him doing dynamite rolls or sushi rolls with cream cheese, which I personally find hideous. And he does them very, very well. So he should have self-esteem because he does one thing and he's the best at it in the whole world. So Iru dreams of sushi, and I dream of one day eating Iru sushi. So in this video, we viewed James's conceptions of the self and self-esteem. What do you think about yourself? How do you construe your own feelings of yourself and your place in the world? How do others see you? And are you one of those people that define yourselves in terms of what kind of cell phone you have, what kind of car you drive, all those types of things? Finally, we talked about what I think has been one of the most misapplied ideas that James ever came up with, the idea of self-esteem. It's a relatively simple, I believe, elegant idea, but it's turned into a notion that everyone should feel good about themselves, no matter what. Remember, one of the fundamental things about William James's notion of self-esteem is that you're not supposed to feel well if you fail. So, you can start by not failing the next exam and working to feel good about yourself. We'll see you next time. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020, Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved. Take care now. Bye.